The morning air at Fort McCoy carried the crisp scent of pine and dust. The war felt distant here, though the sound of it lived in every guarded glance. Private Jack Turner leaned against the rail of the watchtower, eyes fixed on the baseball field beyond the wire fence. The thud of boots on dry grass, the crack of the bat, those sounds felt like home, reminders of a world that still made sense. Below him, a group of American soldiers laughed, tossing a ball back and forth, their voices carrying across the camp. But just beyond the barbed wire, a line of Japanese prisoners stood silently, faces unreadable. They watched every motion, each swing, each shout, as if studying an unfamiliar ritual. One of them, older, scarred across the cheek, whispered something. Another nodded sharply, his expression alert, tense. Jack couldn't hear the words, but he felt the unease, an invisible wall between two worlds that barely understood each other. He shifted his rifle on his shoulder and squinted. The prisoners stood at attention, not a single smile among them. The bat cracked again, echoing like a gunshot. Several prisoners flinched instinctively. Jack frowned. To them, maybe it didn't look like a game at all. Down on the field, Corporal Jenkins yelled, "Turner, you watching the enemy or daydreaming?" Jack called back, "They're not doing anything, Sarge, just watching the game." Jenkins laughed. "Let 'em. Maybe they'll learn how real men fight." Jack didn't answer. He looked again at the faces behind the wire, rigid, cautious, almost fearful. Then one of the prisoners caught his gaze. A younger man, eyes narrow but curious. Jack raised a hand in greeting. The prisoner blinked, hesitated, then turned away without a word. The wind picked up, rustling the flag above the compound. Somewhere, a whistle blew. The game ended. The laughter faded. The Japanese prisoners turned back toward their barracks in silent formation, leaving only the echo of boots on gravel. Jack stayed at the tower a moment longer, staring at the empty field. The bat still lay on the ground, glinting faintly in the morning sun. He wondered what they thought baseball really was. Maybe someday he'd find a way to tell them. If you're new here, subscribe for more true wartime stories that reveal the human side of history, stories where silence speaks louder than the gunfire. The next morning, the sun rose behind a thin veil of mist, stretching shadows across the compound. Private Jack Turner stood in the briefing room, his uniform still damp from the dew. Colonel Harris paced in front of a faded map of Wisconsin, dotted with red pins marking the camp perimeter. "These prisoners are not like the Germans," Harris said, his voice sharp but steady. "They don't break, they don't talk, and they sure as hell don't trust you." Jack nodded, though the words sat heavy in his chest. The colonel stopped in front of him. "You're on rotation near the Japanese section this week. Keep your eyes open. Don't engage unless necessary. Understood?" "Yes, sir." As the soldiers filed out, Harris added quietly, "Don't forget, Turner. These men were trained to die for their emperor. They'd rather do that than shake your hand." Outside, the air carried the faint smell of smoke and wet earth. The prisoners were already lined up in rows, sweeping the yard under guard. Their movements were precise, almost ritualistic. Jack watched them from a distance, feeling the weight of Harris's words. He remembered his father's voice back home. "You treat a man like an enemy, he'll stay one. You treat him like a man, maybe you'll find something better." Jack's hand tightened on the rifle sling. He wasn't sure which kind of man he was supposed to be here. When he walked the fence line, the Japanese soldiers avoided his gaze. Their faces were carved in stone, calm, distant, unreadable. One of them, the same younger man from yesterday, briefly looked up before lowering his head again. Jack paused. "Morning," he said softly. No answer, just the sound of boots and brooms brushing dirt. Later, during lunch, Jenkins sat across from him in the mess hall, slapping his tray down with a grin. "Still watching your quiet little samurai?" Jack frowned. "They're not doing anything wrong," Jenkins laughed. "You think they'd tell you if they were?" He shoveled a spoonful of beans into his mouth. "Don't get soft, Turner. These guys bow before they stab." Jack didn't respond. He just stared out the window toward the wire fence, shimmering in the sunlight. The prisoners were still there, silent, patient, unknowable. And in that silence, Jack felt the tension between orders and understanding, between duty and doubt, growing heavier by the hour. By late afternoon, the field behind the barracks came alive with noise. The soldiers had set up another baseball game, the kind that broke the monotony of guard duty and endless drills. Private Jack Turner leaned against the fence, glove under one arm, watching his friends warm up. The shouts, the laughter. It almost made him forget there was a war outside these fences. But beyond the razor wire, the Japanese prisoners stood again in quiet formation. Their faces were still, eyes sharp, tracking every throw and swing. Jack noticed the same young man from before, along with an older prisoner who seemed to command silent respect. His posture was perfect, hands folded neatly behind his back. When the bat cracked, the man's eyes narrowed, focused not on the ball but on the motion itself, as if studying a combat drill. Jenkins jogged up beside Jack. "So you know they think we're showing off, right?" he said, grinning. Jack shrugged. "Doesn't look like envy to me." "Yeah? Then what do you call that?" Jenkins nodded toward the prisoners. "They're watching like hawks." Jack followed his gaze. The older prisoner stepped forward slightly. His name tag, stitched in faint characters, read Sato. There was something deliberate about the way he observed, almost analytical. His eyes moved from the batter's stance to the arc of his swing, the pivot of his feet, the shout that followed the hit. It hit Jack then. Sato wasn't enjoying the game. He was studying it. "Maybe they think it's training," Jack muttered. Jenkins laughed. "Training for what, to hit a fastball?" But Jack didn't laugh back. The thought lingered. To men who'd lived by military discipline, baseball might look like a strange kind of combat. Precision, command, coordination. Every motion had purpose, every shout an order. As the inning ended, Jack stepped onto the field, waving to the prisoners with a friendly grin. "Have you ever seen a game before?" he called out, half joking. No one replied. The guards nearby looked uneasy. Behind the wire, Sato stared back, his expression unreadable. He spoke softly to the others, who nodded, eyes fixed on the Americans. The sun dipped lower, turning the fence into black lines against the orange sky. Jack felt the weight of their stares, even as the laughter around him rose again. He realized they weren't just watching, they were trying to understand, and that understanding could change everything. The following day was quiet, the kind of stillness that made the camp feel larger than it was. Jack Turner walked his usual patrol route along the outer fence, boots pressing into the soft earth left damp by the morning rain. Beyond the wire, the Japanese prisoners were gathered in small groups, mending uniforms, talking in low voices, their discipline precise even in rest. Jack spotted the older man again, Lieutenant Sato. He stood apart, arms crossed, watching two prisoners practicing movements that looked almost choreographed. The gestures were slow, deliberate, graceful in a way that reminded Jack of martial arts demonstrations he'd seen before the war. When one of the prisoners raised a stick as if it were a sword, Jack froze. Sato corrected the man's stance with a firm nod. "Training," Jack murmured under his breath. "Even in here." He reached into his pack and felt the baseball he always carried. Without thinking too long, he pulled it out and tossed it gently over the fence. It bounced once in the dirt and rolled towards Sato's feet. Every prisoner stopped what they were doing. The yard fell silent. Sato looked at the ball, then at Jack, suspicion darkening his eyes. For a tense second, no one moved. Jack raised his hands slightly and said, "It's just a ball for play." Sato didn't respond. He bent down slowly, picked up the ball, and turned it over in his hands. The stitching caught the sunlight. Then, with controlled precision, he threw it back. It sailed through the air, clean and straight, landing perfectly in Jack's glove. Jack smiled. "Good arm," he said softly, knowing Sato couldn't understand. One of the younger prisoners whispered something to another, his expression shifting from fear to curiosity. Jack nodded toward them and mimed a throwing motion again. "Ball," he said, pointing to the glove. They exchanged words in Japanese, hesitant. Then one man mimicked Jack's motion, an awkward throw that barely cleared the dirt. A ripple of quiet laughter passed among the prisoners. Jack laughed too, relieved by the sound. For a fleeting moment, the fence didn't feel like a barrier. It felt like a boundary they might both learn to cross. As Jack walked back to his post, he looked over his shoulder once more. Sato still stood there holding the baseball, but this time his expression was softer, curious, almost thoughtful. 2 days later, a jeep rolled into the camp carrying a visitor from headquarters. The soldiers gathered near the gate as a young man stepped out, his uniform pressed, his face calm but alert. The name stitched above his pocket read, Corporal Tanaka. His dark hair and sharp features caught the guard's attention immediately. Japanese ancestry. Unmistakable. Colonel Harris met him with a firm handshake. "You're our interpreter." "Yes, sir," Tanaka replied. His English carried a Midwest accent, smooth and measured. Born in California. My parents came over before the Great War. Jack Turner watched from a distance, curious. The irony didn't escape him. A Japanese-American soldier sent to interpret for Japanese prisoners of war. That afternoon, Harris called Jack to assist Tanaka near the compound. As they approached the fence, the prisoners turned their heads in unison. Tanaka stopped a few feet from the wire and spoke in Japanese, his tone formal but friendly. The prisoners stood silent at first, then murmured among themselves. Tanaka listened, then turned to Jack. "They thought you were doing combat drills." Jack blinked. "Combat drills?" "Yes," Tanaka said with a faint smile. "The way you swing the bat, shout, and move in rhythm. It looks like military coordination to them. They assumed baseball was a form of battle training." Jack laughed, shaking his head. "You're kidding." "They're not," Tanaka replied. "To them, discipline and motion are sacred. They saw your game as an extension of war. Organized, fierce, competitive. They didn't understand it was just a game." Jack leaned on his rifle, the humor fading from his face. "Guess we all see what we're trained to see." Tanaka nodded slowly. "That's why respect matters. You show them care, not pity. You give them clarity, not command. It'll change how they see you, and maybe how you see them." Jack looked through the fence again. Sato stood there, silent as ever, watching. Jack met his eyes for a moment, then nodded once in quiet acknowledgement. Tanaka noticed. "That one," he said softly, "was an officer, kendo instructor before the war. He watches everything. You earn his respect, the others will follow." Jack exhaled, glancing at the baseball still resting near the fence post. "Then maybe it's time to teach him what the game really means." Tanaka smiled faintly. "Just be patient, Turner. Understanding takes longer than victory." The afternoon sun hung low over Fort McCoy, spreading long shadows across the field. Jack Turner leaned against the fence, the baseball in his hand smooth and warm from use. Tanaka stood beside him, arms crossed, watching the prisoners gather near their barracks. "They've been quieter lately," Jack said. "Less tense." Tanaka nodded. "They're observing you. They want to understand your rhythm, your purpose. Curiosity is the first step." Jack looked toward Colonel Harris's office in the distance. "Think he'd let me teach them the game?" Tanaka hesitated. "If you ask him right, maybe, but he'll think you've lost your mind." "Maybe I have," Jack said with a faint smile. "But if a game can make this place less like a cage, it's worth trying." When Jack entered Harris's office, the colonel barely looked up from his paperwork. "You want to what?" "Organize a baseball demonstration for the prisoners, sir," Jack said, "just to show them what it really is." Harris set down his pen, eyes sharp. "Turner, this is a prisoner of war camp, not a playground." "I know, sir. But if they understand it's a sport, not combat, they might calm down. Could make guard duty easier." There was a long silence. Harris studied him for a moment, then sighed. "One demonstration, under supervision. No contact beyond the fence." Jack saluted. "Thank you, sir." That evening, Tanaka translated Jack's instructions to the prisoners. A few nodded with cautious curiosity. Others remained stiff and unreadable. Sato stood in the back, arms folded, saying nothing. Jack demonstrated the basics, tossing the ball lightly to Tanaka, explaining through gesture and tone. He mimed the swing of a bat, the catch of a glove, the run between bases. The prisoners watched every motion in silence. Then, unexpectedly, one of the younger men laughed as the ball slipped through his hands and rolled across the dirt. The sound broke the air like sunlight through clouds. A few others smiled, shy and uncertain. Jack caught Tanaka's eye. "That's a start." Sato's gaze lingered on the ball resting in the dirt. His jaw tightened, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of something. Interest, perhaps. As the prisoners returned to their quarters, Tanaka said quietly, "He's not convinced yet." Jack looked towards Sato and nodded. "Then we'll give him a reason to be." The wind shifted, carrying the faint echo of laughter, the first in weeks. The following morning carried a strange kind of energy through the camp, quiet but expectant. The sky was clear, the field freshly marked with white chalk lines, and the prisoners gathered near the fence with measured curiosity. Jack Turner stood on the American side, glove in hand, while Tanaka translated his words with patient precision. "This isn't war," Jack said, his voice calm and steady. "It's a game, a way to test skill, not loyalty. Strength, not hatred." Tanaka echoed his words in Japanese. The prisoners murmured softly among themselves. Some smiled faintly, others remained still, their eyes cautious. Jack picked up the bat, holding it out for someone to take. For a long moment, no one moved. Then, from the second row, a young man stepped forward, nervous, thin, barely more than 20. His name, Tanaka whispered, was Hiro. Jack nodded to him. "All right, Hiro, give it a try." Hiro took the bat with both hands, gripping it awkwardly. Jack motioned for him to stand sideways, feet apart. He tossed the ball lightly toward him. Hiro swung hard and missed completely, spinning halfway around. For a split second, silence hung heavy in the air. Then one of the other prisoners chuckled. Another joined him. The sound spread, soft but genuine. Hiro straightened, face red, then laughed too, bowing slightly in embarrassment. Jack grinned. "Good. That's how everyone starts." Tanaka translated, and the laughter grew. The tension that had clung to the fence for weeks began to ease. Jack tossed another ball. This time Hiro connected, a weak grounder that barely rolled forward, but enough to make the others clap their hands in approval. "See?" Jack said, catching the returning ball. "It's about trying again." Sato watched from a few steps back, arms crossed, unreadable. His gaze followed every movement, the swing, the exchange, the laughter that now replaced the silence. Tanaka noticed him but said nothing. Jack kept throwing, letting a few more prisoners take turns. Each hit, each miss drew more smiles. Even the guards nearby seemed less rigid, their rifles resting a little lower. When the session ended, Jack looked towards Sato again. "He didn't play," he said quietly. "Not yet," Tanaka replied. "He's still deciding whether it's weakness or strength," Jack nodded. "Then we'll show him it's both." As the prisoners filed back to their quarters, the sound of soft laughter lingered in the fading light. A small victory in a place built for none. The next few days passed quietly. The baseball games became a regular part of the routine, with the prisoners and soldiers exchanging turns in the field. It wasn't much, but it was a distraction from the grim silence that once defined the camp. There was a sense of release in the air, if not joy, then at least a momentary reprieve. But for Jack Turner, something lingered in the back of his mind. The war, the letters from home. He hadn't spoken much of it, not since he arrived at Fort McCoy, yet the quiet had its own way of letting memories resurface. The evening shift was nearly over when the mail truck pulled up to the barracks. Jack was near the fence, leaning against a post when he saw Corporal Jenkins walk toward the truck, a small bundle of letters in his hand. "Mail call," Jenkins shouted. It wasn't much, but Jack's heart skipped a beat. The last letter he had received from his mother had been weeks ago, and his brother's name hadn't appeared on any list of the fallen. Jack had a sinking feeling that it would soon. The soldiers lined up to collect their letters, some eagerly tearing into them, others more solemn, reading the words with quiet distance. Jack took his letter, eyes scanning for the familiar handwriting of his mother. He sat on a bench near the edge of the field, the evening air crisp around him. Unfolding the letter, he read, "Dear Jack, I hope this letter finds you well. I pray for your safety every day. Your father says to keep your head down, but your brother says, get back home alive. We miss you so much, and your father is fixing the roof again. He says he'll wait until you get back to help him with it. I heard about the bombing in the Pacific. They say it's the worst thing they've ever seen. Your brother hasn't written, but I think he's still out there. Please stay safe. We need you. With all my love, Mom." Jack's eyes blurred for a moment, the words fading as he held the letter tightly. The pain of war hit him suddenly, deeply. His brother's name wasn't mentioned, hadn't been mentioned for weeks. He folded the letter, placing it carefully in his jacket pocket. His gaze wandered across the camp, his mind lost in thought. The sound of laughter from the baseball field felt distant now. Sato appeared in the distance, watching him from beyond the fence. Jack met his eyes, and in that silent moment, something passed between them. A shared understanding of loss, of the things words couldn't explain. He stood up, wiped his eyes, and turned back toward the field. There was still a game to finish, still a chance to make it through another day. The air over Fort McCoy grew colder with the turn of September. The days were shorter now, and the evenings came with a hush that pressed against the wire fences. Jack Turner noticed it most after the games ended, how the laughter faded quickly, replaced by the echo of boots on gravel and the creak of the wooden towers in the distance. But something had changed inside the camp. The prisoners had begun to linger near the field after chores, their eyes following the baseballs that rolled to the edge of the fence. Some of them even mimicked the motions of batting or throwing when they thought no one was watching. One morning, Tanaka approached Jack near the supply shed. "Sato wants to talk," he said simply. Jack raised a brow. "He does?" Tanaka nodded. "He's asking permission to form a team, his men, their rules, they want to learn properly." Jack blinked, unsure if he had heard right. "You mean they actually want to play?" Tanaka smiled faintly. "It seems so. They said if they can understand your game, maybe they can understand you." Later that afternoon, Jack and Tanaka met with Colonel Harris. The colonel listened in silence, his arms folded across his chest. Finally he said, "If it keeps the peace, fine, but keep it organized, no heroics." Jack saluted. "Yes, sir." When Tanaka translated the approval to the prisoners, the reaction was subdued but unmistakable. Shoulders relaxed, faces lifted, a quiet ripple of gratitude. Sato stepped forward, his tone measured, eyes locked on Jack. "He said," Tanaka translated, "that discipline can exist in peace as well as in war. He wants to prove that." That week, the prisoners began their own training. Jack watched from across the fence as Sato drilled his men with precision, his commands short and rhythmic. Their movements were sharp, almost militaristic, but now the rhythm was playful, not combative. When Jack finally handed them a few worn gloves and bats, the men accepted them with careful hands as if receiving sacred tools. The first time a ball flew cleanly into the air from a Japanese bat, even the guards cheered. Sato allowed a brief smile before bowing slightly toward Jack. Tanaka leaned beside him, his voice low. "You've started something, Turner." Jack watched the field, the players laughing on both sides of the fence. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Maybe a new kind of team." By early October, the wind carried the scent of autumn through Fort McCoy. The trees along the perimeter had turned shades of red and gold, their leaves scattering across the baseball field. Jack Turner stood at the pitcher's mound, tightening his glove. Across from him, Sato adjusted his grip on the bat. The first official game between the guards and the prisoners was about to begin. The soldiers gathered on one side, the Japanese prisoners on the other. Tanaka stood between them as a translator, though words were hardly needed now. The shared anticipation was enough. Colonel Harris observed from a distance, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. "Let's keep it civilized," he muttered. Jack nodded toward Sato. "Ready?" Tanaka relayed the question. Sato bowed slightly, his face calm. "He says," Tanaka translated, "he's been ready since the first time he saw you throw." Jack smiled faintly. "Then let's play ball." The first pitch sliced through the cool air, a clean fastball that thudded into the catcher's glove. Sato didn't swing. He just watched, measuring. The second came, and again Sato held his stance. Jack narrowed his eyes, throwing the third pitch with more speed. This time, the crack of the bat echoed across the camp. Foul ball, but solid contact. The spectators, both soldiers and prisoners, cheered. It was a strange, unified sound, one that made Jack's pulse quicken. As the innings passed, the tension grew into something exhilarating rather than hostile. Every play drew applause, laughter, and good-natured shouts. The guards teased, the prisoners responded, and Tanaka's translations were often drowned by cheers. When Jack stepped up to bat, Sato took the mound. The two men locked eyes, a silent challenge, but one laced with respect. The pitch came fast, almost perfect. Jack swung, missed, and laughed under his breath. "Good throw," he said. Tanaka called out, "He said thank you." By the final inning, the score was close. The sun dipped low, casting orange light over the field. The wind stilled. Jack wound up for what might be the last pitch of the game. Sato watched him with calm precision. For a moment it felt like time paused. The war, the fences, all of it faded. Just two men, two teams, one game. Jack threw. Sato swung. The sound that followed carried farther than anyone expected. A sharp, clear crack that silenced the camp. The ball soared high into the fading sky. The ball sailed into the sky, cutting across the golden light like a silent promise. Every eye in the camp followed it. Soldiers paused mid-cheer, prisoners froze mid-step. The world stood still. It landed just past the makeshift fence line in the tall grass, untouched. A clean hit, a home run. For a heartbeat, there was silence. Then the entire field erupted. Guards clapped, prisoners cheered. Even the watchtower guards smiled as the moment broke through the tension that had once wrapped this place like barbed wire. Jack laughed, tipping his cap toward Sato. I didn't think you had that in you. Tanaka, standing behind the plate, grinned. He says neither did he. Sato jogged the bases with a modest pace, not triumphant, but dignified. His fellow prisoners clapped for him, some with quiet bows, others with wide, boyish smiles. When he crossed home plate, Jack met him there, hand outstretched. Sato hesitated only a moment before shaking it. The weight of the war, the mistrust, the months of silence, they didn't vanish, but they softened. Something shifted in the air, something human. Jenkins clapped Jack on the back. Well, hell, if that don't beat everything. Yeah, Jack said, eyes still on Sato. It does. They continued the game until the sky dimmed and the shadows grew long. No one cared who won. The final score was forgotten. That evening, around the mess hall, the soldiers talked not of duty or drills, but of the hit, the swing. The quiet shock of seeing a man they once feared become, for a moment, just another player. Even Harris, who had watched from afar, said nothing as Jack passed him in the corridor. But there was a nod, brief, almost imperceptible. Later, Jack sat alone near the field, the cold earth beneath him, breath rising in the night air. He stared at the spot where the ball had landed, still visible under the moonlight. Tanaka approached, hands in his pockets. He said that swing was for the men who died without ever getting to speak their truth. Jack nodded. It said more than any speech I've ever heard. They stood there in silence, two men from different worlds, joined by something unspoken. The fences were still up. The war still raged outside, but something had cracked, not in the bat but in the barrier between them, and that crack was wide enough for hope to get through. A week later, the world inside Fort McCoy shifted again, but this time, not because of a game. The news came in the form of a shortwave broadcast that played from the officers' mess hall. Crackling through the static was a single name, Hiroshima. Jack stood frozen near the window, the radio's monotone voice spelling out the aftermath of something unimaginable. Devastation. Total. Thousands presumed dead. City leveled. He didn't say a word. Neither did anyone else. Outside, the camp was quiet. Word spread fast, even across the language barrier. The Japanese prisoners heard through whispers, gestures, and finally from Tanaka himself. Jack watched as Tanaka explained it slowly to Sato, who listened without a flicker of emotion until the final sentence. Then, Sato's body seemed to cave in slightly, as if his spine could no longer carry the weight of the news. He didn't speak. He just nodded and turned away. The baseball field stood empty that day. No games, no laughter, no throw or swing, just the dull echo of grief settling across both sides of the fence. Later that evening, Jack sat on his bunk, reading the letter from his mother again. The words blurred. His hands shook. The bomb, they said, had ended the war, or would soon. But at what cost? He heard footsteps outside. Looking up, he saw Tanaka standing at the door, holding something in his hands. He won't come out of his quarters, Tanaka said. Sato. He hasn't spoken since yesterday. Jack stood slowly. Does he blame us? Tanaka paused. No, he blames himself for surviving. Jack nodded, a lump rising in his throat. Tell him, I'm sorry, for everything. I will, Tanaka said, then hesitated. But you should know he respects you. He just doesn't know what to do with that now. As night fell over the camp, the wind turned colder. Jack walked to the edge of the field alone. The bat still lay where they'd left it, half buried in dirt. He picked it up, ran his fingers over the wood and stared across the fence. He couldn't see Sato, but he felt him on the other side. The silence between them now was different. No longer fear or misunderstanding. It was mourning. And in that silence Jack understood. Even in peace, war leaves shadows that take a lifetime to fade. The morning after the silence settled in, Jack made his way across the yard with something in his hands, a worn baseball, scuffed from weeks of use. The weight of it felt different now, heavier somehow, as if it carried the last remaining pieces of something neither side could name. Tanaka waited near the edge of the compound, his expression solemn. You're really going to do this? Jack nodded. He doesn't have to answer. I just want him to know it matters. The guards gave a hesitant nod and opened the gate. Jack stepped through alone, escorted but unguarded. The Japanese prisoners watched silently as he walked toward their barracks. He stopped just outside the entrance, not daring to step further. He crouched and placed the baseball on the wooden steps. Beside it, he tucked a folded piece of paper. Tanaka had helped him write it. Play again when you're ready. That's all. He stepped back, bowing once, not out of formality but out of respect. Then he turned and walked away without looking back. The next 2 days passed without a word. The field remained empty, the bats untouched. Jack resumed his duties, though he found his gaze constantly drifting toward the prisoner quarters, searching for a sign. It came quietly. On the third morning, he returned from his patrol to find something resting on his bunk. A baseball, the same one, but now it had something new, inked across one side in neat Japanese characters. Jack held it gently, confused. Tanaka walked in and saw it. "He signed it," he said. "What does it say?" Tanaka read slowly, his voice low. "For peace, not war." Jack stared at the ball, the message sinking into him deeper than he expected. His throat tightened. "He left it for you," Tanaka added. "Didn't say a word. Just placed it there." Jack didn't speak. He just sat on the edge of the bunk, the ball resting in his palms like a fragile truth. Outside, the autumn wind rustled the canvas of the tents and sent leaves dancing across the compound. The war was still not over, not officially. But between two men, once enemies, now something else, something had ended. Not with words, not with apologies, but with silence. And a baseball. October faded into November, and with it came the news everyone had anticipated. The war was over. Papers arrived at Fort McCoy declaring Japan's surrender. The camp would soon begin the process of repatriation. For the prisoners, it meant return. For the guards, it meant goodbye. For Jack Turner, it meant something harder to define. He stood near the field one morning, baseball in hand, when Tanaka approached with a quiet smile. "Sato asked," Tanaka said, "if we could play one last game." Jack turned slowly. "All of us?" Tanaka nodded. "No teams, no uniforms, just the game." That afternoon they gathered, guards, prisoners, translators, and even a few officers watching from afar. The fences still stood, but for the first time no one seemed to notice them. Jack tossed the ball in his hand and called out to Hiro, who grinned and took up a bat. Jenkins stood beside a prisoner at second base. Sato manned shortstop. Jack took the mound. The game began with easy pitches, slow hits, and shared laughter. No one kept score. There was no winner. In the middle of the fourth inning, Sato made a diving catch that drew cheers from both sides. Jack jogged over, helped him to his feet. They stood there laughing, covered in dirt like boys on a summer field. "I never thought I'd enjoy this," Sato said in clear English. Jack raised his brow. "You speak English?" Sato smirked. "Enough to know you throw too many fastballs." They both laughed. The sun dipped low as the game stretched into the evening. Shadows grew long. Each swing, each catch, carried more than motion. It carried meaning. Near the final inning, Jack stepped to the plate. Sato stood on the mound. They locked eyes once more. No rivalry now, just farewell. Sato pitched, and Jack hit a grounder toward second. A prisoner scooped it, tossed to Sato at first, but Jack beat the throw. As he stood on the base, catching his breath, Sato approached with the ball in hand. "No enemies," he said softly. "Only men." Jack nodded. Only men. When the final play was made, no one cheered. Instead, they stood in a circle near the mound, shaking hands, nodding quietly. The field was empty by sunset, but in the dirt were footprints, mixed, overlapping, indistinguishable. That night the camp was silent, but it wasn't the silence of war. It was the silence of something finished and something remembered. The days that followed were filled with movement. Papers signed, bags packed, trucks lined up outside the camp gates. The Japanese prisoners stood in formation once more, but this time not as captives. They would soon return to a country that no longer resembled the one they had left. Jack Turner watched from the tower as the final group prepared to depart. Sato stood among them, dressed in the same worn uniform, his posture straight, face calm. Their eyes met one last time. A nod. Nothing more, but it said everything. Later that week, Jack returned to the barracks to find a letter waiting for him. No stamp, no address, just a folded envelope with his name written in delicate ink. He opened it slowly. "Turner-san, I am home now, though nothing feels like home. The city is gone. The faces are changed. And yet, I carry something with me. Your game. I told my son about it. I told him the game was about honor, not power. Grace, not war, he wants to learn. I will teach him as you taught me. Baseball showed me the spirit of your people. Not in their guns, but in their laughter. In the way you stood across from us, not with anger, but with patience. I do not know if we will ever meet again. But if we do, I hope it will be on a field, not a battlefield. For peace." Sato Jack sat on his bunk, staring at the letter until the sun dipped behind the trees. The wind rattled the window pane gently. He walked to the empty field, now overgrown in patches, the bases faded. He stood on the mound, held the letter to his chest and looked to the horizon. The fences were still there. The towers, the guard posts, they remained. But inside, something had changed. War had ended on paper weeks ago, but for Jack Turner, peace had arrived in silence, in a game, in the swing of a bat, and in the hands of a former enemy who now, halfway across the world, taught his son not how to fight, but how to play. If this story moved you, subscribe to the channel for more true narratives that uncover the forgotten corners of history, where humanity wins in the unlikeliest of places. And if you're ready for the next story, click on the video on your screen now.